How you doing here? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Gimel, Daf 33 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, your friends. Okie dokie. So what can I tell you about Daf 33? Daf 33, it's going to be somewhat like technical. Yeah, I think that's fairly accurate to say. We're going to talk about different kinds of containers when it comes to wine, specifically hide, like animal skin, animal hide containers, and earthenware containers. Now, I'm going to be explaining the daf based on the explanation of Rashi. There's a humongous Tosfos on this, where he asks a million kashas on Rashi, and he gives a very interesting answer, which is he says, well, the Tosefta has a completely different girsa in important ways that's different than our Gemara. And according to that version, things make a lot more sense, which is somewhat interesting. So, we're going to work with the version that we have in our Gemara, and I'm going to explain it based on Rashi. To my memory, there's really only like one particular thing that that I think sticks out for me in terms of questioning the approach of Rashi. But yeah, it was pretty interesting, right? There's a humongous Tosfos there where he asks a million kashas on Rashi. Turns out there's a different girsa. I thought it was a really interesting thing, like just how sometimes like when things don't make sense, right? It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole or a round peg into a square hole, whatever it is. Like sometimes you just have to rethink the whole thing. And it's interesting how there's this different girsa based on the Tosefta, and then all of a sudden everything just made so much sense, So, but anyways, the Tosefta is Tosefta, our Gemara is our Gemara. We're going to work with what we have. So that's basically what's going to be on the agenda for today. We're going to be looking at hide vessels, earthenware vessels, and in what scenarios are they mutter? Can you use them? What scenarios can't you use them? What can you do if you can't use them so that you can use them? These kinds of things. Very exciting stuff here at Babylon Talmud. Here we go. Alrighty. We are going to start on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. I'd say about a third of the way or so, maybe even 40% of the way through the Amud. At the two dots where it says, notice Avodah kochom v'kankaneim. Yep. That basically, I would say, is the sort of chapter title for today's daf. The flasks of the Avodah Kochavim, these wine flasks made of hide, v'kankaneim, as well as their earthenware jugs. Now, Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught, notice ha'Avdei Kochavim. Okay, when it comes to the leather flasks, leather, that's a good word. Leather instead of hide. Leather, that's a good word. The leather flasks of the Avodah Kochavim that were used for wine. So they're wine flasks. Okay. Grudim, chadashim, mutarim. If they are both new and unpitched, okay, because they would put pitch on their containers. Whether we're talking about leather containers, whether we're talking about earthenware containers, after it was finished, I guess it makes sense. They would put some kind of finish on it. That they would put pitch as like a finish on the interior, maybe the exterior too, but on the interior of the, in this case, the leather flask. Now, here is the thing. This is as we said, a leather flask belonging to leather wine flask belonging to an Oved Kochavim. So obviously, if we're concerned about non-kosher wine, so then can you use a wine flask that belonged to an Oved Kochavim that his wine was flasking in? So we say, here's the thing. So we just mentioned two things, unpitched and new. Let's talk about each one of those separately. Let's talk about unpitched. So basically, so they would pitch them. That's how they would kind of finish them. Now the pitch would absorb the flavor of the wine, the Yei Nesech, and therefore it was problematic because then it would impart the flavor into the wine, and therefore it's a problem if it is pitched. Let me just yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Basically, it's going to absorb the flavor of the wine and then impart the flavor of the Yei Nesech into your wine. So therefore, if it's pitched, it's problematic. If he pitched it, you ditched it. He pitched, you ditched. Pitch, ditch. That's how you remember. The other, so that was one thing. It has to be unpitched. But the other thing that we said is it has to be new. It has to be new. So now this is something that's unique to leather flasks. Later on today's Amud, we're going to talk about earthenware flasks. Earthenware flasks, as we're going to see, kind of are very absorbent and will absorb immediately. But actually, on leather flasks, there's more time. It can actually be used a few times. Before the flavor is imparted into the leather. So if you have a leather flask that is both new, and new in this case means that it was only used, a few times, nothing more than that. One of Tosfos' kasha on Rashi is, how many times? But anyways, Rashi doesn't say. I think I saw, who said, maybe in the art school, and I know they said, like maybe the Ramban says maybe 3 times, 2 times, I don't know, whatever it is. Rashi says it has to have, it can't be used more than just a few times, and it can't be pitched. If both of those criteria are met, then it's permitted, right? If you have this flask from an Ovid Kohen that is both new and unpitched, so then all good. Right? Again, Tanu Rabban and the rabbis thought, notice Ovdei Kohen, these leather flasks from Ovdei, these leather wine flasks from Ovdei Kohen, Grudim, Chodoshim, if they are both unpitched and new, that they haven't been used more than just a few times, Mutarin, then they're permitted. However, if either Yishanim or Mizupafin, if either it has been used more than just a few times, even if it's unpitched, but it's been used more than a few times, well then the Yei Nesech is going to seep into the leather flask, and it will no longer be acceptable. We're going to learn, I think later on this Amud already, we're going to learn later on this Amud about what you can do about that, right? There are solutions. But anyways, in the meantime, before our solutions, it's Asur, as well as Umizupafin, right? Even if it's new, but it's pitched, as we said, the pitch will absorb the flavor of the Yei Nesech, making the situation unacceptable. Asurin, so it is forbidden. Oved Kochavim Ribivon Ve'ibdon. Now, if an Oved Kochavim poured hot pitch, he poured hot pitch into the flask. Ve'ibdon, and he tanned it, I guess he processed the hide. V'nasan l'socho yayin, and then put wine into it. Part of the process of making these flasks was they would tan the hide, they would pour a hot pitch into it, and then they would actually add a shtickle wine while the pitch was still hot, and that wine would counteract some of the sort of some of the negative characteristics of the pitch. The wine would what does that say? The pitch was a shtickle bitter. They would add a little bit of wine to sort of counteract the bitterness of the pitch. So I'm going to read that again. So if the Ovid Kochavim was kind of pitching it by pouring hot pitch into it, the Ibdan, and tanned the hide, and put wine into, added that wine at the end to counteract the bitterness of the pitch. The Yisrael Omed al Gabav, and a Yid is there supervising. Eino Choshesh, well then, all good. Now, Cheve, you might be wondering, all good, What do you mean all good? We just said that the third thing that was happening was that the Ovid Kochavim was pouring wine into the hot pitch, which means we said any pitched wine flask is problematic because the pitch is going to absorb the flavor of the wine, and yet we just said that the Ovid Kochavim is adding wine to the pitch, and as long as the Yid is supervising, it's okay. Why should that make any difference? Amar Papa says, no, this is what it's saying. Ovid Kochavim ribivan ve'ibdan. David Kochavim, if the Ovid Kochavim pours the pitch and works the hide, the Yisrael nos in the sochol yain, and the Yid pours kosher wine into this flask, well then B'Yisrael acher omer al gabav, and another Yid is there as the supervisor, ve'eno choshesh, well then it's all good because it's the Yid who's pouring the wine. Me'achad Yisrael nos in the sochol yain Yisrael acher omer al gabav. How many Yidden does it take to make a leather wine flask? Right? If once already the Yid is there pouring the wine into the pitch, so why do you need another Yid there as the supervisor? Let him go learn. Let him go learn Daf Yomi. Let him open his Gemara, turn on Babylon Talmud. So why do you need him there? And for the Gemara, Dilma Agab Tirde, well, we're concerned that maybe while the pouring Yid, the Yid in charge of pouring is pouring and he's not paying attention, Menasech v'lavadaite, the Ovid Kochavim could slip in a shtikol yein nesech, so therefore we have another Yid who's keeping an eye. Okay. Rav Zvid Omar says, Rav Zvid le'olam kidika Omar meikar. So Rav Zvid says, actually, it's like we initially said. It's the Ovid Kochavim doing everything. The Ovid Kochavim is pouring the pitch. The Ovid Kochavim is tanning. The Ovid Kochavim is pouring the wine into the pitch. And yet, all good. And the answer is, Meikaravan, Vacho be'idno dika shodi le naisi kizorik maim latit. And the reason why it's okay is because he's pouring a little bit of wine into hot pitch. And in practice, that is essentially the same as pouring water into mud or into clay. That it dries and the water just kind of evaporates and it kind of goes away. So here also, this wine is just there as part of the process to counteract any bitterness of the pitch. But once everything dries, that wine is evaporated and it is gone and I imagine flavorless. So therefore, even though the Ovid Kochavim is the one pouring the wine basically disappears once everything is dry. Amra Popi, now says a Popi Shmamina midu Rav Zvid. So we can learn from Rav Zvid. Hay Ovid Kochavim d'shoda chamer levei milchei de Yisrael shari. So Rav Zvid wants to say that let us imply. Rav Popi says that let us imply from Rav Zvid. What did Rav Zvid say? Rav Zvid said that you can pour the wine into the hot pitch, and that's fine. So let's imply from there that we should be able to. So now here's Taka Machlekes and Rashi and Tosfos about what's the deal with this salt. So let's start with Rashi. So basically Rashi says that let's imply from here that if you have a cup full of salt, so then you could pour wine into the cup full of salt because it's just going to dry. And that'll be fine. Okay, so again, Omar Papi says, that's not from Rav Zvid, since you could pour the wine into the hot pitch. Well, let's learn that I Ovid Kochavim, the Shadachamra, Levei Milchei, that an Ovid Kochavim who pours wine into a cup full of salt, the Yisrael, that the salt belongs to a Yid, Shari, that salt is permitted because it'll just kind of dry out. But Maskifla, Rav Ashi says to Rav Papi, Midami, are those two scenarios similar? Hasam Ka'azali Ibud, pouring wine into hot pitch, the wine is going to be ruined and it's going to go away. There's no benefit there. But over here by the salt, it's not going, the flavor is going to be imparted into the salt. And if you use that salt, you're going to be getting benefit from it. So therefore, it says Rashi, you can't use the salt. Okay. Tosfos Taka learns it a little bit differently. He says that it's actually talking about in the process of making the salt, not just a cupful of salt, but like where they would make the salt, that if you poured some wine into that as part of that process before they then cooked it and burned it and stuff, and Rav Papi was saying that should be okay. And Tosfos Taka says, and actually, Tosfos says that we Taka paskins that way. Anyways. Right? What is this? One bit of time. Ashi enel dechuya ba'alma. Klomim der zvid lotish ma'ela. Kumang halacha krab puppy. Interesting. Anyways, fine. Where are we? Bar'idi tayo onas hanu zike mer Yitzchak bar Yosef. Oh, so Bar'idi, the Arab merchant, just went and chapped aran leather flasks from Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef. And Rama Bucham, son of a gun. So Idi Tayo just went and chapped a bunch of leather flasks from Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, from a Yid, and he put wine into the flasks. So now, and then eventually he returned the flasks to Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, also Shalbei Midrashu. And he went to the Beis HaMedrash and he asks, no, now what? Now what? Iditaya took my wine flasks, he put his wine into it. Now what? So Rav Yirmiyah, so it says Rav Yirmiyah, Kachor Rav Ami taught thus, halacha l'maaseh, mimalon, this is important, listen up. Mimalon mayim shloisha yomim umayrin. What you do is you fill up the flasks with water for 3 days and then pour it out. From Ravan says Rava, sorich le'aron me'eis le'eis, that you have to do this every 24 hours. So basically, the solution is, listen up. The solution is that you take this wine. So what was it? Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef had this wine flask that was usurped by Bar'idi. And Bar'idi poured his own wine into it, which is Yei Neseth. And so what do you do? What you do is the following. You pour water into the flask, leave it in the flask for 24 hours. After 24 hours, pour out the water, refill the flask with new water. 24 hours later, pour it out. Rinse and repeat. And then wait 24 hours. And then finally, after 72 hours, you pour out the water a third time. Enjoy. Then you can now use, right? Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef can now use his wine flask once again. Right, so fine. So Ramina, so they thought to say, Hanemile didon. Okay, that's only talking about a scenario where the flask initially belonged to a yid, which means that the flask was initially saturated with kosher wine, with Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef's wine in this example. Then Adi Taya came and he put his own wine in it, and we said, okay, you can do this 3-day washing. Aval did who? But what if we're talking about a wine flask that initially belonged to an Ovid Kechavin? And therefore, the first wine to seep into and be absorbed by the flask was non-kosher wine. Low. So we had to say that you wouldn't be able to just do this irui, putting water in and pouring it out every 3 days, every 24 hours for 3 days. But ki also Ravin, Reb Shimon ben Lakish, echad shelanu ve'echad shelaim, that actually you can do irui, you can do this scheme, not in a negative sense, but just in terms of what we do, this 24-hour irui scheme, right? Or the 72 hours, every 24 hours for 72 hours, even if the first wine ever in the flask was non-kosher wine. Savar Rav Acha Bredirava Kame Rav Ashi Lemeimar Hanemile Notice avakankanim lo, and now is sort of the shift, the segue into earthenware, right? So Rav Acha b'derava in front of Rav Ami, in front of Rav Ashi thought to say that you can only do this Iroi scheme with leather flasks, but not with earthenware flasks, because earthenware is more absorbent. Amar le Rav Ashi responds to Rav Acha b'derava, Loshna notice, Veloshna kankanim. Actually, it doesn't matter. You can, Iroi works both for leather and for earthenware. Okay. Now, we are moving on to earthenware. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. This is an identical brisa as was taught by the leather, but for earthenware. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, at least the ratio of it. Kankanim shel evdei kechavim, earthenware vessels of evdei kechavim, chadoshim grudim mutarin, yeshanim imuzupafin asurin. If they are both new and unpitched, they are permitted. So now, in this context, new means that no wine has ever been in them, according to Rashi. When it comes to earthenware vessels, new means mamish new, because even if wine was put in it one time, the earthenware is more porous and more absorbent, and it will absorb the non-kosher wine, so that's going to be also. Now, you would still be able to do Iroi, that, as we just said, it works for earthenware, but prior to doing Iroi, you wouldn't be able to just right away put in kosher wine. That would not be allowed. So by earthenware, it'd have to be brand new and also unpitched. And this is the kasha, this is the thing I don't understand. Why would it have to be unpitched? Because if we're saying it has to be brand new, never used, who cares if it's pitched? It was never used. That's the one thing that I don't understand. Anyways. So now, okay, when it comes to earthenware, it has to be brand new and unpitched. Okay. Mutarin, then it's mutar. Yeshanim, but if they were used in the context of earthenware even once, umzupafin, or if they are pitched, asurin, they are forbidden. Maybe the reason, maybe that's the answer. Maybe the reason why if they're pitched, they're also is because when they pitch them, they put wine into them as part of the pitching process. Maybe that's why. Okay, so if they're pitched, they're asur. Now, Ovid Kechavim knows in the Sochan Yain. Now, what if an Ovid Kechavim did put his wine into the earthenware, let's say an earthenware flask, I don't know, to be consistent with the leather, I guess. So Ovid Kechavim knows in the Sochan Yain, Yisrael knows in the Sochan Mayim. So what does the Yid do? As we learned a minute ago, Ivrui. Pour water in, and every 24 hours, pour it out and replace it with new water for over the course of 72 hours, and then it's mutter. Alternatively, if a Ovikchavim put wine into the earthenware vessel, Yisrael knows in the Socham Tzir or Murius ve'eno choshesh. A Yid would be able to immediately put Tzir, which is some kind of fish brine, or Murius, we're going to learn more about tomorrow, which is some kind of like fish fat situation. In these scenarios, you could put them in right away, right? Meaning, even if an Ovid Kechavim had used the earthenware jug or flask for wine, you could put in Tzir and Murius right away because those are like acidic and they're going to counteract whatever Yenesech was in there. What does Rashi say? Rashi says in the last Rashi of Lam Gimel Mlad, Miyad aval pishelo mileu mayim, even though there was no ira lefishe atzir umurius sorfin es hayayin and nivla mchalanos, because the tzir and the murius, I guess they're very potent and they would counteract whatever yain nesech remnants were there, and therefore you could fill them immediately. You could fill the jugs immediately with tzir and murias. Lichatchila di'avid. The shaila is when we're talking about the tzir and the murias, so we're talking about lichatchila. You could fill them up, or b'di'avid. You could put in the tzir and the murias right away. Toshmad Tani Rav Zvid bar Oshaya lekech kankanim mina oivdei kechavim. Somebody who purchases earthenware jugs from oivdei kechavim chadashim, if they are new, no sin the socham yayin, you could put wine in it if they're brand new, yishanim. But if they are old, no sin the socham tzir or murias lichat chila. You could put in tzir and murias lichat chila. Okay, gewaltig. But mine Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya Rab Ami. Oh, so Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya asked Rab Ami. Tosfos has a whole shaila about which Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya this is. Tosfos has a whole shaila about which Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya this is. Tosfos once say can't. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya was the grandson of Rebbe. Itaka was by his kever with my family on Pesach, I think. Right, we were here Pesach. On Pesach, I was by Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. He's buried right near Tzvas. He's buried right next to Rav and Abaye. If you go to Rav and Abaye, and right past Rav and Abaye is a Papa, Vishiva Banov or something. And so there's a Papa, and this is a Papa, Rav and Abaye. So the first kever you get to, it's a little bit further up, is Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Then you have Papa, you have Rav and Abaye in their own kind of cape, and then next to that is Rav Papa. And anyway, so Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Tosfos wants to say that that this can't be it can't be that one, because he's asking Reb Ami. Tosfos wants to say that the grandson of Rebbe, I think, would have been too old to be talking to Reb Ami, but I don't know, because he's even in Brises. But I don't know. I mean, Reb Ami was a student of Reb Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was a contemporary, I guess it was around the same time as Rav. Rav was a student of Rebbe. So, I don't know. I'll go upon him. Yeah, Tosfos was trying to figure out which Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya this could be. Anyways, but Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, Rabbi Ami. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya asked Rabbi Ami, Hechziron lekiv shana eish v'nislabnu mao. So you hear the kasha? What if you have an earthenware vessel? You buy an earthenware vessel, let's say an earthenware wine flask from a Oivdei Kechavim. And so we said you could do like Ivrui, or you could put more, brine in it or whatever. What if you just put it back into the kiln, put it back into a fiery furnace? So would that make it usable? Could you then put wine in after that? Amalei Reb Ami responds, Sir Saref or Lokolshkin, if brine can basically burn out whatever Yenesach was in there, certainly fire would be able to burn out whatever Yenesach was in there. If Manaim was also stated, Amr Yochanan, V'amila, Amr Asi, Amr Yochanan, Kankanim, Shel Oivdei Kechavim, the earthenware vessels of the Oivdei Kechavim, Shechzir, and the Kivshan that are returned to their kiln, Ha'esh, the Kivshan Ha'esh, Kevon She Nashu Zivson Meyen, once their pitch kind of falls off, right? It gets so hot that the pitch that was in the vessels kind of melts off. Mutarin, the vessels are then permitted. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi, Leitema ad dinasron el afilu rafoy mirpo, afal gabdelo nasr. Says Rav Ashi that actually it doesn't, you don't have to wait until the pitch like melts off, even if they just get softened because of the heat, even though they didn't quite like melt away, that would also be considered hot enough for the Yenesach to be gone. Kinsa, what about kinsa? Kinsa is a scenario where you burn the jug from the inside, right? So meaning, if you take the jug, and on the inside of the jug there's pitch, and you just take that jug and you put it inside a kiln, and the fire is raging outside of the jug, the earthenware jug, and the jug gets so hot that the pitch on the inside now is melting off. So we say that then the Yenesach is gone, and it's been cleansed. But what if you put the fire directly inside the jug, and then the pitch melts out? would that be considered hot enough? Where am I? So Kinsa, Plige Bar of Acha Ravina, Machlaikis of Acha and Ravina, Chad Osir, Chad Shari, one says Osir, one says Mutter, the commander Osir. The Halacha is like the one who says Osir because it's not getting hot enough because, with the fire is just in the inside of the jug, directly interacting with the pitch. So then, shkoyach that the pitch melts away, but the fire was like directly on it. And now, gewaltig. So I was trying, I feel like I mentioned this a few times even recently, right? That when, so Tosfos Taka points out, this was someone I was trying to remember, that whenever a machlekes Rav Acha and Ravina is always the more lenient opinion, Rav Acha is always the more stringent opinion, and generally we paskin like Ravina, who's more lenient, and that is why in this case we had to Taka point out that in this case actually the halacha is like the one who says Osir, which would be Rav Acha. Ibayu de'asei kasha. Ma'alvita in the socho shecher. Can you, right, so if you have this vessel that has been used for Yenesech and therefore you can't put wine in it, you would have to cleanse it first. Can you put beer in it? Rav Nachman and Rav Yehuda asri. Rav Nachman and Rav Yehuda say no, osir. Rava Shari, Rava says it's okay, you can put beer in there. Ravina Sharale, the Rav Chia, the Rav Yitzchak, Lemirma Beishichor. Ravina allowed Rav Chia B'Rav Yitzchak to put beer in this vessel that had Yenesech in it. Also Rama Bechama, but mistakenly Rav Chia B'Rav Yitzchak put wine in the vessel. And why you can't put wine in that vessel. And even so, Ravina didn't Amra Krai Ba'amo. He said, it was a fluke. Meaning, because you might think, wait, Ravina should have learned a lesson from there. That, he allowed people to put beer in the jug, and look what happened. Somebody ended up mistakenly putting wine in the jug, and wine's not allowed in the jug. So maybe Ravina should have amended his kula to say, actually, maybe he needs to make a chumrah here and say that actually, no, you can't put beer in because we're scared you're going to put wine in. Ravina was not concerned. Look, people, it was a fluke. It was a fluke. It's not something that we have to be concerned about, sort of on a larger scale. Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna, Havle Hanu Mone Defakusna. Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna had vessels made out of dung. Malinu Maya, and he filled them up with water. I guess that they were used for Yenesech, and he wanted to fill them up with water in order to do Irui, in order to be able to, over the course of 72 hours, fill up and pour out water to remove the Yenesech. And Chinu b'Shimsha, but he wanted to go one step further. He also wanted to put them out in the sun to really get that flavor out of the dung. Paku, and what happened? The vessels burst. Reb Abba says to Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna, look, you were trying to be more chomer than you had to, more machmir than you had to. Asatinu alach yisur del olam. Well, now you lost the jugs, these containers forever. And Madam Rabbanon mimalinu maya anuch b'shimshom yomer. Look, the rabbi said to fill up the vessels with water, but they didn't say anything about putting them out in the sun. Amr of Yusana, says Yusana Amr Ba'ami, Klei Neser, vessels made of Neser, in Tyra Lamas can never be purified. My Klei Neser, what are Neser vessels? Amr Yossi Bar Oven, Klei Machporis Shel Tzrif, vessels made out of alum, that is mined from alum mines, I guess, and those vessels are too absorbent and can never be purified. The Parzak Rufila, Parzak, the viceroy Onasani Kuve mi Pumbedisa, he chopped some vessels, some jugs from Pumbedisa. Ram Buchamra, and he put his Yenesech in there, Jinu Nialu, and then returned them to whoever he took them from in Pumbedisa. Also, Shalu, the Rav Yehuda, so they went and asked Rav Yehuda, the Rosh Yeshiva of Pumbedisa. Omer, and he says, Dovish Emach in the Kiyamu, look, this jug, it was a vessel that isn't for long-term storage. He was pouring his Yenesech in it, drinking. You wouldn't putting in there for, long term, to keep for a long time. You're pouring wine, drinking wine, pouring wine, drinking wine. Just rinse them out. That's it. So now the article Taka points out that this would have to not be an earthenware vessel, because we said earthenware vessels are absorbent, right? We said that they would be absorbent even one time, even on the first time. So it must be that maybe this was leather or something, and therefore he was using it sort of I guess just a few times. So I guess it wouldn't have been enough to have crossed any particular threshold that you would have to do like Ivori or anything like that would make it also. Just rinse it out, and that should be enough. Ben mutarn. These red earthenware vessels, the Aramai of the Arameans, kaven de lo baloi tuva, since they don't absorb much, just rinse them out and all good in the hood. Amr Rav Papi, says Rav Papi, Hani pasvasa, the beimichse, these vessels of the beimichse came into lo baloi tuva, since they don't absorb much, again, rinse them out with water. All good. Kase, when it comes to cups, Rav Asi osir, Rav Ashi shari. Rav Asi forbids, Rav Ashi permits. Interesting. Rav Asi osir, Ashi shari. That's a good way to remember, if we're ever trying to remember this. Asi osir, Ashi shari. Ishasibu oivid kechom. So here's taka machlekes Rashi and Tosfos here. Start with Rashi. Ishasibu oivid kechom pam rishin. Kuliam le plige de osir ki plige b'pam sheni. Iged ami pam rishin v'sheni. Kuliam le plige de osir ki plige b'pam gimel v'ilchsa pam rishin v'sheni osir gimel mutter. So we have this machlekes between Rav, right? So we're talking about, what was it? These cups. Okay, these cups that I guess Yei Nesach was put into them. Okay, so you have these earthenware cups. Now these earthenware cups, so the first time or the second time that it's drinking from, they're very absorbent, and therefore, if the Ovid Kochavim was the first person to use this cup, and he poured the first time the cup was drinked from was non-kosher wine, was Yei Nesach, either the first time or the second time, then it's also, you'd have to do Ivori. But already the third time, it would be okay, because you're just kind of putting wine in and drinking right away. So if it, if the first two times the cup was used was for kosher wine, okay, and then after that, of the club used it for Yei Nesach, but just filling up the cup and drinking it, then it would be acceptable. I'm going to read that again. Right? Kasa, when it comes to cups, Rav Asi osar, Rav Ashi shari, Rav Asi says osar, Rav Ashi says permitted. Now look, ishasibu ovid kechavim pam rishin. Look, if we're saying that the first person to ever use the cup was an ovid kechavim for Yei Nesach, everyone agrees that would be osar, because the cup would have absorbed the Yei Nesach initially. Ki pligi b'pam sheni, where they argue though, is the second time. That there, Rav Asi says osir, Rav Ashi says mutter. Those who say permission v'sheni kulam lo pligi d'osir, those who say that the first time and the second time, if it was used with the enesech, it would be osir. Everyone agrees it would be osir. Kipligi, where they argue with fam shlishi from the third time. B'ilchsa permission v'sheni osir gimel mutter. The halach is that the first two times is osir, the third time is mutter. Tosfos actually says that this isn't talking about the first or second or third time that the cup was used. It's actually talking about the rinsing of it. That if the cup has been rinsed 3 times, then it is mutter. If it hasn't yet been rinsed with Ivor 3 times, then it is asur. Okay. Rav Zvid says, Rav Zvid, Aimone de kunye, that when it comes to glazed vessels, again, the machlek is actually Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says it's glazed with lead. Tosfos says it's glazed with glass. Okay. Glazed, I guess an earthenware vessel that's been glazed either with lead or with glass. It's a glazed vessel. So if it's a white glaze or a black glaze, well then it's permitted because none of the wine is going to seep in. Yeruka also, but a green glaze is also because Mishum de Mitzrif, because how do they make the green glaze? The green glaze is made with this porous alum that we had talked about above that cannot be kosher. The is behu kartufne, and even with the white glaze or the black glaze, if there are cracks in it and the wine can seep in, the enesach can seep into the earthenware beneath, kulu asire. So then, no matter the type of glaze, it's going to be also if there are cracks and the enesach can seep in. Darash Mereimar darshan kunye, when it comes to these glazed vessels, bein uchme, bein chivara, bein yeruke. Shari. Whereas Mereimar says when it comes to these glazed vessels, whether it is white, whether it is black, whether it's green, they're all permitted. Now, frag the Gemara, mai shno me chometz bepaisich de ba'u mini Mereimar. Now, 1 second, why is Yei Nesech different than chometz on Pesach? Because when it comes to chometz on Pesach, they ask Mereimar, hanemani dikunya, that these glazed vessels, Malish Tamushe, Bu Bepischa, can you use them on Pesach? Yeruka loti bailach the mitzayfu v'loi v'asiri. So he says, look, so the green ones that are absorbent, yeah, of course you can't use them on Pesach. There's chametz absorbed into it. Kiti bailach, but the question is, chivar v'uch mimai. What about the white glaze? What about the black glaze? Ki isbu kartufne loti bailach devade baloi v'asir. And if there are cracks in the glaze, then also, of course, it is forbidden. Kitibaylach the shear, we're talking about where it's smooth without any cracks. What's halacha? Omar Luhu, and Mereimar says, you know what the answer is? Ono chazino luhu de medaise. Well, I've seen that all of the glazes sweat. V'chem de medaise bade baloi. And therefore, since the glazes sweat, why do they sweat? Because it must be that there is some liquid that's absorbed into it that is being released. And therefore, v'asire, they are osir. My timer, why are they osir? HaTorah ida al klei cheres, sheriyotze midei dofen ul because the Torah says about klei cheres that whatever is absorbed in there will never be released, and therefore you can't use it on Pesach, which is interesting because how does that relate to the whole Earthenware thing that we've been talking about? You fill up with the water for 24 hours, pour it out, fill it up, pour it out, fill it up, pour it out. Right? We had said that you can be used for whether earthenware, leather, it didn't matter, right? And now we're saying that basically you have to break kli charis because there's no way to fix it. So I think it might depend on where did I see this? I saw this somewhere. I don't think it was Rashi or Taisis. Maybe the art school talked about it. That I think it might depend on the level of I can't say it's definitively because I didn't get into it. I didn't really see it anywhere. But it's a good question, right? Like what are the limitations of Eruah? Because here we're saying that, well, you can't, for Chametz and Pesach, you can't use it. It doesn't say, well, just, fill it up with water. So I think it depends kind of the level of penetration of whatever got in there. I guess just using it for Yei Nesech is not considered a deeply affected vessel, and Eruah, just filling it up and pour it out over 3 days would be enough. But yeah, definitely tzarich iyun, what exactly are the limitations of Eruah? Okay. So back to our question, Ma'ishna mi Yei Nesech tidarash lehu Mereimar kulumani dekunya shars. So how come by Yei Nesech Mereimar had said that all types of glazed vessels are no problem, and yet by Pesach he says they are a problem? If we can say, well, Chametz is da'oraisa, Yei Nesech is only da'rabanan, therefore he can be lenient. No, right? Therefore the rabbis were lenient. No, when the Chacham make a gezerah, they make it the same way, or to mimic the oraisas. If the Chacham are going to say that Yei Nesech is an issue, or Stam Yenam is an issue, well then, right, and we're saying, well, if you used vessels, you have to be concerned about vessels used for Yei Nesech, well then we should have the same laws, the same halachas governing which vessels are osur or mutter based on deoraises, right? If by Paisach certain vessels are usable and certain vessels aren't, and we're saying that we have to be concerned about Yeh Nesech, so then we should use the same halachas to now apply to Yeh Nesech as well. Right, called the Takun Rabban, Kin Deraisa Takun. Anything that the rabbis establish it using the same rules that would apply to just as if it was a Deraisa. So, and for the Gemara is a Tashmishu B'chamin, is a Tashmishu B'tzonin. The difference is, maybe this I guess relates to the question that I asked a minute ago. What are the limitations of Irui? Well, we're saying just off the bat here, well, by Chametz, where we're saying that there's no way to fix it. That's because we're talking about vessels that were used with hot stuff, whether for cooking or whether eating hot things in there. But a cup that was used to drink wine from, it's the wine is cold, it's not seeping in so deep, and therefore Meremar was saying that to drink cold wine in a cup, the cup these glazed cups won't absorb, but to be kind of using these vessels for hot stuff, they will absorb. The vessels will absorb, and you won't be able to use them on Pesach. That was Daf Lamed Gimel, Masechta Avodah Zarah. Today we focused on different kinds of vessels that are used for Yain Nesech and what the different halachas are governing them. Particularly, we talked about leather vessels and earthenware vessels. I'd say the main distinction between the two is probably that earthenware vessels absorb immediately, whereas leather vessels take a few times before they start absorbing. We talked about how pitch is problematic. We also talked about that you can sort of solve the issue, though, by doing this Irui scheme, where you kind of pour water in, let it sit for 24 hours, pour it out, rinse and repeat 2 more times over the course of 72 hours. And then that kind of fixes things. Well, that was Daf Lamed Gimel, Masechta Avodah Zarah. If you enjoyed, peace out.